He wrote her love letters every single day. Then he stabbed her 15 times and called a prostitute for a quickie. This is the story of the perfect husband who wasn't. The camera finds Simonette Mes on the dance floor, her hair loose and her laughter cutting through the noise of the party. She moves with unself-conscious joy, and her husband, Jonathan Kroppy, joins her, matching her energy step for step. To anyone watching, they were the embodiment of a modern fairy tale. She was a teacher who had dedicated her life to children in the most dangerous neighborhoods, crossing the Verrazano Bridge every morning to work in communities where violence was a daily reality. Her parents, Teresa and John Mapes, watched their daughter build a life that seemed straight out of a storybook. When she first met Jonathan at a social gathering outside of school, she called her mother that very night. She declared that she had found the one. Teresa remembers the conviction in her daughter's voice, a certainty that this man was going to be her future. Jonathan pursued her relentlessly, writing love letters every single day, letters that Simonette carefully saved in a shoebox. He was a homebody who made her laugh and seemed content to build a quiet life. He gave her everything she wanted. The family was cautious at first, but Jonathan won them over with his charm. He presented himself as the perfect suitor, attentive and devoted. Simonette, who was not quick to give her heart away, had finally found her prince. Their wedding was a grand affair, a Cinderella-themed celebration that fulfilled every dream she had ever had. They cut the cake, tossed the bouquet, and moved into a condo where they were supposed to live happily ever after. For all intents and purposes, the Mapes family believed their daughter had found her happy ending. Jonathan was studying for his master's degree, and Simonette continued her passionate work as a teacher. She was revered by everyone who crossed her path in Staten Island, a beloved daughter, wife, and educator. She would wake up every morning, cross the bridge, and volunteer her time in communities that others avoided. She was fearless in her dedication to her students. Jonathan was attentive, always by her side, playing the role of the supportive husband. He made her laugh, he held her hand, and he continued to write those love letters. But there were cracks beneath the surface of this perfect picture. Jonathan's charm was a mask, and behind it, he was a man consumed by a hunger for something Simonette could never provide. He sought validation in the arms of other women, paying for their company with money that was meant for their future. He was living a double life, one that Simonette had no idea existed. She trusted him completely, believing in the man she had married. Her parents trusted him too. They saw a son-in-law who doted on their daughter and who seemed to want nothing more than to make her happy. They had no reason to question his devotion. The illusion was so complete that when the truth began to emerge, it was almost impossible for anyone to believe. Jonathan Kroppy was a master of deception, and he was about to prove just how far he was willing to go to protect his secret. The morning of the murder began like any other. Teresa Mapes usually called her daughter around 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning, just to say good morning and plan the day. But that day she didn't feel well, so she decided to let Simonette sleep in. The decision haunted her later. Around 1 p.m., her cell phone buzzed with a voicemail from Jonathan. 5 minutes later, he called again. When she answered, his voice was flat, devoid of any genuine emotion. He told her he was sorry. He told her Simonette was dead. He repeated it like a broken record. Teresa, in a moment of sheer instinct, asked him what he had done, and then hung up the phone. She was in a state of complete shock. Jonathan called back immediately, demanding that she come to the condo. The weight of his words didn't fully register. It felt surreal, impossible. When John and Teresa arrived at the scene, they were met with a wall of police tape. It was chaos. Detectives swarmed the area, and the reality of the situation crashed down upon them. Teresa collapsed, overwhelmed by a grief that would never fully heal. The world had stopped spinning. Their daughter, their beautiful, devoted daughter, was gone. They were put in an ambulance to collect their thoughts, but there was no collecting them. The shock was too immense. They had spoken to her just the day before, and now she was gone, taken from them in a way that was incomprehensible. They knew nothing about what had happened, only that their baby was dead. Just 1 week before her murder, Simonette had posted a strange message on her Facebook page. It was cryptic and unsettling. She wrote that she and Jonathan had survived a shootout that day. She thanked God they were okay. She mentioned that during summer school, they would figure out what the fighting had been about. She explicitly referenced the Cypress Hill projects, calling them no joke. She finished the post by addressing the wannabe gangsters of Staten Island, telling them to be grateful for what they had and to stop trying to live a lifestyle they would never understand. The post was alarming. Her parents read it and felt a chill. Simonette worked in a dangerous neighborhood, and her mother had always been scared for her safety. The possibility that her murder was gang-related, that she had been caught in the crossfire or had witnessed something she shouldn't have, seemed plausible. The post hinted at a threat that she had barely escaped. But within hours, detectives would determine that the crime scene was anything but a home invasion. The evidence didn't add up. This was not the work of random gang members. The scene was staged and the brutality was too personal. The post, which had seemed like a warning about the dangers of her work, was actually a tragic distraction. The real danger was not in the Cypress Hill projects. The real danger was much closer to home, and it had a name: Jonathan Kroppy. He was the one she should have been afraid of. Jonathan told the police a convenient story. He claimed he had left the condo to run errands and returned to find the house trashed. He said he discovered his wife at the bottom of the stairs, dead. The scene appeared to be a home invasion gone wrong, a bungled robbery that had turned deadly. The family bought the story initially. They had no reason to suspect their son-in-law. They thought there was a madman on the loose. But as they stood at the crime scene, questions began to surface. The Mapes family looked at the evidence and saw the passion in the murder. This wasn't a simple burglary. Nobody breaks into a house, throws the owner down the stairs, and then stabs them 15 times. It was excessive, frenzied, and deeply personal. The staging was clumsy. The detectives on the scene saw through it immediately. They knew they were looking at a killer who was trying to cover his tracks. A home invasion would have been quick and messy. This crime was deliberate. The killer had taken the time to stage the scene, hoping to throw the police off the trail. It was a desperate act, and it revealed the killer's arrogance. They believed they could commit the perfect murder and walk away. But the evidence was piling up. The Mapes family started to look at Jonathan with suspicion. His behavior was strange. He showed no tears. He showed no emotion. He wanted them to move on, to get beyond the tragedy. He was acting like a man who had already closed the chapter on this story. At the funeral, Jonathan wept like a baby. He placed 2 roses on her casket and played the part of the grieving widower perfectly. But the Mapes family had seen his true reaction to the murder, and it was anything but grief. When they pressed him for answers in the immediate aftermath, he told them they needed to get beyond it. He wanted them to move on, to stop asking questions. There were no tears, no genuine emotion. He appeared to be more annoyed that the police were bothering him than distraught over his wife's death. He slept on the couch in his in-laws' house that very night and asked them to share a pizza. He acted as if a minor inconvenience had occurred. He showed no remorse, no sadness, no heartbreak. It was as if Simonette had been a stranger to him. He continued this behavior long after the funeral. He continued to see prostitutes until the day he was arrested. He even brought them to his own mother's bed while she was at work. He had no regard for anyone. The mask had slipped completely. His behavior was so cold and callous that it made the Mapes family realize the truth. Their son-in-law, the man who had written love letters every day, the man who had promised to love their daughter forever, was a monster. He didn't care about Simonette. He only cared about himself. His performance at the funeral was just another act, another layer of deception designed to convince the world that he was innocent. But the family had already seen the truth. While Jonathan was trying to convince the family to forget, detectives were building a case against him. They looked at his computer, and what they found was damning. In the weeks leading up to the murder, Jonathan had been conducting a series of disturbing Google searches. He had searched for how to throat slash. He had looked up what destroys DNA. He searched for how to clean up a crime scene and how to stamp somebody. He was looking for a way to commit murder and get away with it. He was planning to kill his wife. The evidence was irrefutable. He hadn't acted in the heat of the moment. He had been preparing for this crime for weeks. He thought he was smart enough to outwit the police, to leave no trace, to stage a crime scene that would fool everyone. He was wrong. His arrogance was his undoing. The digital footprint he left behind was a roadmap to his guilt. The police also discovered his secret life. He had been maintaining an affection for prostitutes, spending money that was meant for his education on women who would never know his name. His wife had discovered the truth. She found a phone number and traced it back to an escort. She confronted him, and that was the moment he realized his lies were about to be exposed. He couldn't face the shame. He couldn't face the anger of his family. He chose murder over the indignity of being revealed for who he truly was. Simonette had uncovered the horrifying truth. Her perfect husband was not the man she thought he was. He wasn't studying for his master's degree. He was using that money to fund his secret life. He was a serial philanderer with a history of paying for sex. He had been lying to her for their entire marriage. The deception was so complete that it must have shattered her world. When she confronted him, she threatened to expose him. She threatened to tell his family, to tell her family, to ruin the image he had worked so hard to build. He couldn't have that. He couldn't bear the thought of his life falling apart. He couldn't bear the thought of his family and friends knowing the truth. He was a master manipulator who had been living a lie for years. The exposure would have been humiliating. He viewed his wife not as a partner, but as an obstacle. She was the one person who could destroy everything he had built. He couldn't divorce her because that would raise questions. He couldn't leave her because that would expose his infidelity. The only solution in his mind was to silence her permanently. The murder was not a crime of passion. It was a calculated decision. He killed her to protect his image. He killed her because he valued his reputation more than her life. He stabbed her 15 times in a frenzy of rage, not because he lost control, but because he wanted to make sure she was dead. He wanted to make sure she could never tell anyone the truth. The most shocking piece of evidence came from one of the women he was seeing. She was known only as Miss Pumpkin, a prostitute who had been providing services to Jonathan for years. She testified at his trial, and her words were chilling. On the day of the murder, Jonathan called her with an unusual request. He didn't want to meet at a motel as he usually did. He wanted a quickie at his own home. When she arrived, he was calm and composed. He asked her if she had seen the news about a teacher who had been murdered. Her response was immediate and instinctive. She asked if that was his wife. He confirmed it without hesitation. He told her, "Yes, they murdered my wife. Someone murdered my wife." He said it as if he was discussing the weather. He showed no emotion, no remorse, no sign that he had just committed a brutal act. He went on with the encounter as if nothing had happened. The testimony was devastating. It proved that he had no feelings for Simonette. It proved that he was capable of compartmentalizing his actions to an almost inhuman degree. He had just stabbed his wife 15 times, and hours later, he was paying for sex. He continued to see Miss Pumpkin and other prostitutes long after the murder. He showed no signs of guilt. He was a man completely devoid of empathy. Miss Pumpkin's testimony painted a picture of a man who was utterly selfish, a man who only cared about his own gratification. He was a predator, and he had finally been exposed. The trial of Jonathan Kroppy lasted 5 weeks. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence: the internet searches, the testimony of Miss Pumpkin, the staged crime scene, and the cold, unemotional behavior of the defendant. The jury heard it all. They saw the photos of Simonette, a woman who had been beloved by everyone. They heard the testimony of her parents, who had lost their only daughter. They heard the story of a man who had lived a double life, a man who chose murder over the shame of being exposed. It didn't take them long to reach a verdict. After just 2 hours of deliberation, they found him guilty of second-degree murder. The sentence was 25 years to life. He would spend the rest of his life in prison. At his sentencing, Jonathan stood before the family of his dead wife. He apologized for his lies and his infidelity, but he refused to apologize for the murder. He maintained his innocence to the very end, telling the family, "I did not kill her. I am an innocent man." The family sat in silence, listening to the man who had destroyed their lives. They knew the truth. He was guilty. He was a monster hiding in plain sight. The fairy tale was over. Simonette was gone, and her parents were left with a life sentence of grief. They had lost their best friend, their daughter, and their future. They were the real victims. Jonathan Kroppy was going to prison, but he had already destroyed everything that mattered.